Awesome. So there is tons of expertise in here. My job today is to really go over in 60 minutes kind of what it starts to sound like when you implement PBIS. So I have, the slides are uploaded. I did, however, move some things around. So I'm just gonna let you know in advance. They're in there, but I moved them around. Speaking of moving around, I'm not supposed to. So they have super glued my feet here. I'm a pacer, like I would normally be back there talking to you. So I'm gonna try really hard to not go back there or stand in front of a pole. That's my goal. All right, so getting started with PBIS in high schools. Let's have some hands go up, like on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being like we're implementing, and 5 being like we got this, we're implementing. Where are you in your school? 2.5. All right, I got it. Okay, thank you. And how many of you are brand new to the concept of PBIS in high schools? Awesome. Okay. I want to make sure I honor that there's tons of experience in this room and that I'm obviously not going to cover everything in 60 minutes. And so I have to dodge next door as soon as this is over, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody after that next session. And I'm always available by email, although my return rate is not that fast. So learning objectives for today, we just want to talk about one way to start thinking about high school PBIS implementation. We want to know how to talk to staff who might be reluctant. I don't know, does anyone here have staff who are reluctant? Okay. And I hope that you'll leave today with one thing in mind that you're going to do a little bit differently. So we could literally spend an hour telling you why it's hard to implement PBIS in high schools. But I don't think that's going to be that helpful, so this section is going to go really fast. We know in general, like don't even think high school for a moment. We know in general that implementation science tells us that getting anything big like this in a system in place is hard. It's challenging. There are all kinds of things that go on that make it challenging, right? We have different goals. We're all probably in buildings where we have an administrator who wants us to focus on one thing, and our teachers want us to focus on another thing, and the counselors want us to focus on another thing, right? There's all these competing ideas and goals, and they're all good, and they're all worthwhile, but we have to figure out how to make them fit together. And, you know, I'd like to skip over to fluid participation, right? So staff turnover, administrator turnover, all of those things make this very complicated, even when you're not in a high school. I have a section in the PowerPoint about youth voice. I think they covered it this morning. I thought they did a really great job of helping us understand how important it is that we hear them. How 2 different people gave us 2 different views, and they're both so valid and so important and can be really dismissed without even intentionally dismissing them. So I would encourage you to look up for Learning. It's a not-for-profit that focuses solely on youth voice in education. And they have great resources, they're great people, and they really love to help get youth voice off the ground. So they have these 4 different stages that they talk about in Up for Learning. And the first one is youth as our recipients, like it's us giving them stuff, talking at them, telling them, teaching them. And then it's youth as consultants. So in my mind, that's like when we have a PBIS team over here, and then we have a youth team over here, and the youth team gives the adult team feedback and information. They kind of act like consultants. And then we have them when they're emerging partners. And this is when it gets kind of scary, right? And uncomfortable. Like, well, like partners? That kind of implies equal, I don't know. So this can get a little uncomfortable, right? Because we need to be really clear. Do we mean equal partners? Do we mean equal voice? What do we really mean here? And then when you are full partners, it does mean equal voice. And that is tricky, right? That's hard to think about because it makes us lose some control over the work. However, really great things can happen when you have youth voice, as evidenced by this morning, but it really does increase our engagement rate. It really does help kids feel a higher level of self-worth, and it helps them build leadership skills, which we need them to have when they leave our four walls, right? So the outcomes, there's research that shows the outcomes are impressive. When we engage youth and we actually get their voice, which can mean we're starting out with a survey all the way up to equal partners. When we think about that, they have a stronger sense of self. They're better critical thinkers. They're better at being on teams. They have better organizational skills. They build social capital. So they start to matter among their peers differently, and they feel more like they belong. So the benefits far outweigh the scaries. If we're willing to kind of get our feet in there and just if we're just willing to jump in a little bit, we're gonna see a difference when we get their voice. The last thing I want to point out about here for student benefits is that the kids aren't afraid to say things that we're all afraid to say. They're not afraid to talk about equity issues. They'll just say it, right? Their filters aren't there yet in a lot of ways, right? Their brain's not quite cooked, so they don't have a full filter, so they just will spit it out, right? And that could be about equity issues, or that could be about the teacher who is inconsistent, or it could be about this teacher here is really great because he lets us eat, even though the rules don't eat Cheetos in class, he is amazing because he's like, I don't care, you're hungry, eat. And then the person next to him is the teacher who's like, eat today, it's fine, I've had a bad morning. And then tomorrow is like, the rule is we don't eat. And then this guy over here, he's the rule follower. He's the one who is consistently making us follow the rules in our class. No eating means no eating. Sort of like when you're playing basketball and your foot goes out of bounds. Out of bounds is out of bounds. That's him. So the kids will tell us about this if we ask them, if we have consistency across a building. So as a side note, when you think about PBIS implementation, it is about all of us getting on the same page, right? The hardest part is getting all the adults on the same page. But these three people don't know it, maybe, but he's setting everybody up. He is gonna have to work triple time to build relationships with kids, and he's not gonna have to try very hard because he just lets them do whatever they want. It's a different kind of relationship, but it's still a relationship, and it's gonna be super inconsistent for her. So we wanna make sure that we are asking kids, because they'll tell us stuff like that. And that youth voice really does matter. It also helps us with adults. So it gives us new ideas. So I'm one of those people who can be a little jaded, I guess you would say. So I have this like there's nothing new under the sun thing that goes through my head a lot. And then I think it was last week, I think it was United Airlines, decided they had a new idea. And it was that we should get on airplanes by having window seat passengers go first. And then middle people go first. And then aisle people go next. Like, really? Did they just think of that? I mean, that's kind of wild, right? But somebody, like, think how long there have been airplanes. No one's, in my 53 years, no one's done that. So it's pretty wild, right? Like, if we get people together, if we get the right humans in the room, new things will come about. We have to get uncomfortable for that to happen. We have to be nervous. We can't know what people are gonna say. We can't have a pre-meeting where we all talk about what we're gonna talk about. We have to be authentically open and available for those conversations. It does help us get new perspectives. It also gives us new information. It does tell us a lot about what our relationships are like with marginalized communities and what's happening in the community. So the bottom line is that it will create this synergy in your building, and it will be beyond what we can even imagine will happen. It's a little like when you have community members come to your district leadership team. It is a game changer because everybody is not sure what is going to be said. No one knows exactly what direction it's going to go. And that's how it's going to be with Youth Voice. So a couple of my mentors would be Patty Hirschfeld and Stephanie Martinez and Bridget Flannery, all doing high school work. And they created this slide, and Mimi Cato, sorry, I missed Mimi. They created this slide that tells us, oh, things are complicated in high schools. There's a lot to consider. But they did a great job of giving us a graphic for that. So the contextual influences the size of your building, the culture of your building, the developmental level of your youth, which we all have to take into consideration every day, which you all know, because COVID told us we have some developmental holes, right? So the key things we want to make sure we're working on in a high school are data, and if you were in the roundtable discussion yesterday in the afternoon, A, you're a trooper for doing that, and B, we heard these things over and over. We need to be using our data. We need to be using leadership. We need to have leadership at the table. It's just so hard to do this work if you don't have an admin at the table. And I mean almost every time, almost every meeting. Because otherwise everybody on the team is out running around like they are trying to find an administrator to get an answer. And if I'm the educator, I'm super busy, obviously, and the principal's busy, and we keep missing each other, and days and days and days and days go by, and we can't get a decision made. It's super disenfranchising to team members. It feels like, why do we even have a team? If we can't get answers, why do we even have a team? So communication, having leadership at the table, and data, and I'm going to talk about the core features of this implementation of PBIS in a minute. And then when we think about key high school focus areas, we're really talking about engagement and success. So that would include social behavior, academics, belonging, and the one that we're not really going to talk about today, but we want to make sure we don't miss, is freshman support. So when I work with high schools and they're about to start check-in, check-out, I generally don't have a tier 2 intervention. I don't generally have them start with the whole building. Like, let's start with something manageable and let's focus on 9th graders, right? What happens with our 9th graders at the beginning of the school year can pretty much tell us if we don't intervene with certain students, we know what's going to happen, right? We know they're going to be lost. So when we look at size, there are all of these things. When we look at culture, there are all of these things. When we look at developmental level, there are all these things. And then we have the data, the leadership, and the communication. So I'm going to go now into really talking more directly about PBIS. Just so you know, I generally don't recommend people in high schools call it PBIS. I generally remember, like, let's name it culture, let's name it climate, let's name it whatever you want to name it. But the letters PBIS just tend to bring along this image of everything being babyish. So what I'm going to tell you, if you walk out of here with one thing, this is it. I guess that would mean you could leave, which would be bad, but one thing, you have to focus on what matters to your teachers and your youth. And if I were starting first, if I had a buy-in issue, I would start first with what your teachers are telling you is getting in the way of instruction. What's making them consider becoming a barista? That is what you have to focus on, hands down. I'm being recorded, so I probably shouldn't say this, but sometimes your data says one thing, but your teachers are saying another thing, and I would go with your teachers saying every time. If we're working on buy-in, what your teachers say is getting in their way, every time is what we need to go for, in Amy's opinion. So when we think about what's getting in their way, it could be cell phones, right? It could be dress code. I was in a large school in Ohio, and it kept coming up that there were just so many kids having dress code issues. Dress code, dress code, dress code. Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about it. If it's getting in the way of for the teachers and it's making the teachers feel like becoming a barista, then let's let's fix this. Let's get on board and let's fix this. So we really do have to focus on what matters. And I would start with your teachers in addition to your youth. I'd focus on your teachers first. That's an Amyism right there. So attendance, behavior, course performance, climate, we want to focus on what matters to all of those people. It could be you live in a community that can tell you that the kids who are graduating from your high school are really unable to communicate when they wait on people at the grocery store. When's the last time you went to the grocery store and whoever was behind the counter didn't speak at all until they said $79.88? Right? Like that's a problem, right? And this information, what we're going to start focusing on in high schools, if we're going to work on PBIS, it's going to help with that. But we can also find that out from our community members, not just our youth and our staff. So when we think about PBIS, first things first, it's not a program. This is not a program. So when you hear people say, we have the PBIS program, in my mind, what I automatically hear is, I have somebody who maybe doesn't have a complete understanding of what's going on. PBIS is not a program. It's the dinner plate where you put all your other work and get organized. It's the framework that you use. It happens to be the public health framework. I think it's super helpful for educators in high school to understand this wasn't some dude sitting behind a desk being like, I'm going to come up with something new, and I created a triangle, right? I mean, this was somebody who was working with schools who said, let's take the public health prevention model and put it in schools. That's what this is. So you can get rid of some of the notion that it's babyish just by helping educators understand where it came from. So when we're talking about a framework, we're basically talking about getting the system together and having a way that we make decisions that is consistent, where we have high standards, and we're lined up with our organization's principles, values, and goals. How many of you think your staff know what your school-wide improvement goals are? I know, right? So if we're going to get them on the same page about something, we might need to go backwards. We might need to kind of go back and have some of those conversations. I was in a, where was I? I was in a high school this past Monday, and they have absolutely no collaboration time, none. Like they get to school, they see kids immediately. They don't have team time during the day, they don't have grade level time, they don't have department time, they don't have after school time, they have no staff meetings, and it's gonna be really tough because we gotta get them all on the same page, and it may be that we need to back up and say, okay, are we even all on the same page about our school improvement goals? Don't hurry, don't rush this implementation or you will be sorry. I used to say there's nothing worse than rolling out check in, check out in high school twice. But there are a lot of things that are a lot worse than that. But it's pretty bad, right? So let's talk about this framework a little bit. So here's the thing. We look at a framework like this and say, if we're all providing education, like academic instruction around a subject area, we can assume if we're teaching that with fidelity, 80% of our youth are going to respond, and about 15% are going to need a second layer of support, and about 1 to 5% are going to need a third layer of support. So those numbers break down among your staff. So when we feel frustrated with our staff, it would be really good if someone could remind me and maybe remind you that they need more support, not more snarky Amy. So we know that if we actually teach people about PBIS, and this isn't teaching, right? This is just kind of an introduction to PBIS, basically. But this idea is, if we teach them with fidelity, 80% are gonna do okay. 80% of our staff will do okay. But what are we gonna do for that 15% of staff who aren't on board? And what are we gonna do for the 1 to 5%? Who really need a third layer of support? So starting to think about these numbers in terms of your staff can be super, super helpful, because what they need is more support, not more irritation from Amy, I guess. right? They need more support. That's really what they need. And sometimes it's hard to remember that when you're in the weeds. So the thing about PBIS, I'm going to skip a few slides here just for a second, just so you know. And I noticed last night while reading my PowerPoint again that the equity word is not in the center of this, it's up at the top. But we do want to make sure that everything we do is around data systems and practices. So here, I don't have it this way today because I don't have enough time with you for you to really get my sense of humor. But typically I have Stewie from the Family Guy on here, because that's how I think my inside voice sounds, like Stewie, like just a little bit snarky, a little bit sassy, as my husband says, salty, I think sometimes is the word he uses. But here's the thing. If you believe that you should use data to make decisions, which doesn't mean throw everything out, doesn't mean throw your gut out, but if you believe that data should drive decision making, and if you believe there need to be things in place so grown-ups can do their jobs, which are systems, and if you believe we should use evidence-based curriculums and evidence-based strategies and interventions with kids, just like we do in academics, then you buy PBIS. If you buy data systems and practices, you buy it. You may not buy how it's been implemented, right? Because most of us have experiences in places where it's been implemented around stickers and bouncy houses and prizes and games and missed instruction and all those kind of wild things that it was never intended to be about. PBIS is using data to make decisions. PBIS is about having systems so you can do your job. And PBIS is about having evidence-based interventions for kids. That's it. So the whole buy-in thing almost always comes back to the prizes, the acknowledgments, the rewards. Like, oh, this is just about rewarding kids. It's not. It's not. It's about using data to make decisions. It's about making it so grown-ups can do their work. And it is about using evidence-based strategies and interventions with kids. That's it, plain and simple. So this is where usually Stewie's head would pop up and he'd be like moving his crib around, yelling, "I'm not a baby." It's not babyish. It has to be a fit in your building, it has to be a fit with your staff, and it has to be a fit with your kids. Because if it's not, they'll just dismiss you out of the gate. But I don't know any adult who has ever come up after a session and said, "Yeah, I just don't buy the whole data thing." No one says that. No one says our school shouldn't be organized so grown-ups can actually come to work and do their job. No one says we shouldn't use evidence-based practices with kids. No one. Data systems and practices, that is all this work is. It helps us get organized. Data guy right there from last night, right up here, data guy. We do need to use our data. I can tell you more than once I have messed up really pretty significantly by going into a school as an external coach and rolling out their data. Like I see this data and I'm like, the inequity between black and white and brown and white is so striking, it makes my blood pressure go up. I go in, I roll it out, I think I'm being helpful, and basically I lose the team for the entire year. Like, it's happened, for real. Like, that is not the way to do it. If you can figure out what's getting to your staff, use that data. And if that data doesn't come up in the way that you need it to, find it. Because it's in there somewhere. It may be a staff climate survey. It may be an exit ticket. It may be my nightmare of Google documents. It might be something really quick. So last week when I was in Wisconsin, they're identifying what their top 3 behaviors of concern are. They did a Google sheet that took less than 5 minutes, and that's what their team's going to run with. And so we can find whatever they told us, you can find in your data, right? They're worried about safety. Well, it's not that hard to find your safety data, right? About behavior and acting out and all of those things. So find what matters and use data systems and practices around it. When we think about acknowledgement systems, you want them to be relevant. You don't want to miss tons of time in instruction. You want to make it so it matters to kids and it's tolerable for staff. So for instance, I don't know when the last time you watched college football is. Like Thursday, my husband was like on the same place in the couch last night when I called him that he was on Monday night when I saw him watching football, right? So he's a social worker too, so I guess it kind of balances out a little bit. I don't know. Anyway, stickers. College kids have stickers on their helmets. College football kids have stickers on their helmets. So the whole stickers are stupid thing, it's like, well, they're only stupid if they don't mean something. It's okay with college football players because it means something. Like, I don't want you to just give me a little star sticker. I want to know what it represents, right? I'm not suggesting using stickers, by the way. But I'm just saying, like, the whole babyish, it's all stickery stuff is like, we're missing the point. Ask the kids. They'll tell you what matters. Prom tickets matter. Game tickets matter. Homework passes matter, right? Getting in line in one of my districts for first on fried chicken day matters. Those things matter. Having an adult that you can have lunch with matters. So find out what matters. Find out what's getting in the way for your teachers. Find out what your kids think. Then find your data and focus from there. It's like the back door. Because we are different in high schools. We do have a history of, I'm going to close my door, and I have this fiefdom in here, and I get to do instruction the way I want to do instruction. And we don't live in that world anymore. And it's hard to change, but we really don't live there anymore. It's like, I think when Lucille said yesterday, maybe it was Lucille, said yesterday something about like mental health, teachers are not, we need to make sure we're not implying that teachers are mental health clinicians. Because that's not realistic, right? Teachers went to school to teach, not to be a clinician. But teachers are connected to the well-being and mental health and mental wellness of our youth. They are. And if they aren't on board with that, then we need to have some conversations, really hard conversations. And some of those conversations need to happen between an administrator and a staff, but some of those conversations need to happen in small groups in a building. Like, we want to use some peer pressure here to our advantage. So we want to use the voices of the people in our building who have social capital. They may not have a title, but people care what they think and people will listen to them. So data systems practices, get your staff to understand this isn't about acknowledgements. And I see a slide on my screen, but I don't see it up here. Hang on one second. Okay, I skipped this slide because I wanted to remind you, here's the other way you know we don't get PBIS. When you hear people call kids colors. Oh, we have so many red kids. Like, no, they're not red, they're kids. We have this many yellow kids. They're not yellow, they're just kids. Oh, we have this many green kids. They're not green, they're just kids. We are all the same as them. We have areas of strength where we don't need help, and we all have areas where we need a little bit of bump. And then if you're like me, you got some areas where you have some pretty high level needs in some areas. Like, ask Jennifer Norton from the Midwest PBIS Network how much individualized help I get every month with my reimbursements. For like 15 years, I'm going to need tier 3 supports. I don't have those skills. I need someone to help me. Don't call me a red employee. I travel, I show up on time, I do my work, right? I study, I do all those things, so don't call me a red employee. Just say there's Amy and she has high level needs in reimbursements, right? That's way better. So that's why I have this slide in here, and you can use this slide. There's an activity that's listed on it when you download it that you can remind yourself to ask your staff. Get your staff to remember there's no such thing as a red kid. The other thing that I've found to be extremely helpful is when we teach our whole staff the job of a tier 1 team. So this gets us away from, I've been in more high school meetings where we have a parent on the team and their job is to get the donuts for the acknowledgement, and all we really talk about are acknowledgements. It's the first way you know you've gone in the wrong direction. If very much of your, I'm almost going to say like more than 5 minutes, but I don't have anything to show that that's true. But if you have very much time in your team meeting talking about acknowledgements, you're on the wrong track. You're just on the wrong track. You got to regroup. So rolling out for your team or for your staff what a team does can actually be super helpful because it gets them away from the whole "this is about parties" thing. So we need a team with our administration on it that represents our building and our community and our kids. That team has to have an administrator on it. I know there are exceptions when administrators can't be there, but over and over I see when an administrator is not there, what happens. So this is the team who's going to lead the work, lead the SEL, the social emotional learning, lead the social emotional behavior, whatever you want to call it. This is the team who's going to lead that work. So we don't want to have a trauma team and a restorative team and a PBIS team and a blah, blah, blah team and a blah, blah, blah team. We want to have a team that leads the work around social emotional learning, behavior, mental health, mental wellness, whatever you want to call it. And that team needs to have vision and expectations that's driven by your kids, your staff, and your families. If you live and breathe, actually I would just say everywhere should use the culturally responsive field guide that tells us how to have kids identify what behavior is okay at home, what behavior is okay at school. Wait, let me start that over again. What behavior looks like, let me try all that again. Let's say our expectations are safe, respectful, responsible. We need our kids to identify what that looks like at home. We need our kids to identify what that looks like in their community, and we need them to identify what that looks like at school. We don't want to unintentionally shame kids by being like, that's not appropriate. Well, dude, it's appropriate at my house. So let's be really careful about that. If you want youth voice, have them weigh in next August, or have them weigh in June about what safe, respectful, responsible looks like in all the areas of their life, and validate that we have different expectations in different places. I worked in alternative school for a long time. I cuss like a sailor, which is probably an insult to sailors. I don't mean that. I talk like I live in an alternative school all the time. And I don't, but I don't do that at work, right? So we need clear vision of what everybody wants the school to feel like. When we say culture, we're talking about what it feels like in your building. What do we want that to look like? I can tell you as an outsider, I can walk into a high school and know if I'm welcome almost immediately. By how the security officer greets me, by how I stand at the desk at a high school office with people looking at me but not speaking, right? We all know these things, but what do we all want it to look like? And then we need to have really clear rules and expectations. Out of bounds is out of bounds is out of bounds. This is what we expect, this is out of bounds. Who can argue with that? Who could possibly argue with the notion that we all need to be clear about what we expect of our kids? I want you to be clear with what you expect about me. What do you expect of me at work? I need to know so I can do it. So having really clear rules and routines and clearly defined rules and routines, that's how we're going to teach kids what we want them to do. Have you ever been to one of those recycle bins? Have you ever seen one of those recycle bins? And you're like, we don't have Whole Foods where I live, but if you're at Whole Foods, there's a bunch of different recycle bins, and you're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to put where. Has anyone ever experienced this? I don't know. I can't follow all that. Just tell me where to put the recycling. How about let's be really clear. Paper, plastic, right? Just tell me. I'll do it if you tell me and you teach me how to do it. So that's the other thing. So we need to have a matrix. So I'm going to go with safe, respectful, responsible. We need to have a matrix that breaks down what safe, respectful, responsible, those are our 3 school-wide expectations for today. We need that broken down. What does that look like in the hallway? What does that look like in the bathroom? What does that look like in the cafeteria? And this is the part we miss in high schools a lot. What does that look like in the classroom? So when I go to a school to walk through and I see the matrix back there by the door that looks, I don't have my glasses on, so it's super bad today, but like in the back, do you see that little frame back there on the wall by that back door? Let's pretend for a minute that's the matrix. Well, first of all, kids don't read the matrix. It's not for kids. The matrix is so grown-ups can remember to use the words. Hey, before you go to the library today, remember we want to show respect to all those other kids who are in there taking their tests. We're going to be quiet when we go in. Like, how hard is that? It took me all of like 1.5 seconds. But if I have those words in places big enough where I can see them, I will remember to use them. If they're back there, it's not going to work. It's not going to work at all. Matrices are for grown-ups. So when we have those clearly defined and we teach them, we should assume if we're teaching and acknowledging with fidelity that 80% of our youth should be responding. And what I mean by teaching is like, so I'm true social worker. I hope I don't offend any social workers in here, but like my math skills are terrible. And there are a lot of us out there. I don't know if you're a social worker, but there's a lot of bad social work math going on out there. Ask my boss. I lost my train of thought. So you can't tell me how to do algebra. Like you can't do that over the announcement. You can't make algebra into a mantra that we all repeat every day at 8:15. You can't. It's humanly impossible. You're gonna have to teach me why it's important, what it is, what I need to do. So when I had this friend who dated this guy who was he was a tree climber, and he rescued owls. He worked for this, can't think of the name of it all of a sudden, but anyway, he rescued birds in trees and he had to climb trees. Okay, so my friend gets into this whole tree climbing thing. The next thing you know, 5 of us are in a field in Oregon with harnesses on learning how to climb a tree for 5 days without a bathroom. And I'm a camper, so I'm pretty okay with most of that. But so here's why I'm telling you this, because this is how they taught us to tie ropes. So not only do I have math reimbursement problems, I'm very klutzy. I don't currently, but I'm a yoga teacher. I started out teaching yoga by having left and right written on the front of my mat. Like I'm just kind of backwards all the time. And so anyway, I was a little worried about the knots. I don't know how to tie a knot. I can like tie my shoes, right? So the thing is, every day for this week that we were in Oregon in the field, the first half of the day, oh, thank you. We should have made sure the like stir it up sticker was showing. The first half of the day, we were under a tent learning about ropes and knots and how to pick a safe tree. Like you don't want a widowmaker tree, that's bad. So they show us the knots. So imagine this. Imagine they just are like, here's how you tie a knot for this tree. And then they walk away. And then every day for 5 days, they remind us, this is how you tie a knot. Well, I can tell you I'd be dead, first of all. But here's how they did teach us. Here's what this knot looks like. Here's why this knot is important. Here's how you tie it. Watch me. Now you tie it. And there are 2 of them walking around the room, or the tent, giving us feedback about our knots until we get it, which took me a while. I have tier 3 knots. I need tier 3 knot sports too. So here's the thing. They didn't stop there. Then they had us have us tie the knots behind our back. Then we tied the knots with our hands or our eyes closed. And then we got in a tree and we tied knots. The entire time they're giving us feedback. They're doing like, Amy, you're doing a great job of continuing to try, even though you suck. Right? Like they could say that, but they're just
continuously reinforcing what we're learning. You can't tell me how to tie a knot. You have to teach me. And this matrix that we have to teach everything on our matrix. If you have kids coming to the office or wherever you send kids who are being naughty, if you have them lined up, one of the first things we should all ask ourselves is, did we teach them or did we tell them? Because there's a really big difference. And if we're not teaching them, that's on us. We have to teach them, and we have to have a way for grown-ups to do that. We have to have a system because of all those factors I mentioned at the beginning. We have to have a system of how we're going to teach them. So my experience in high schools is we need follow-up from staff. If we give out a lesson plan about teaching personal space, I don't know if you have any personal space issues in your buildings, but if you have a personal space issue and you decide you're going to teach personal space, 2 things. Don't tell them, teach them. 3 things. Get their feedback on the lesson. 4 things. Third thing is, so get their feedback. Make sure they were teaching them. Make sure you've decided when you're all going to teach it. And make sure somebody's following up with the staff about how the lesson went. So that word we use, the A word we use a lot with kids, like we have to hold them accountable. Like we also have to follow up and make sure our staff have what they need to do this lesson. But this isn't where it stops. Like they didn't just teach me the knots and then leave. I'm a human being who needs a little feedback. So we need to have a way to acknowledge whatever we're teaching. So the notion that we just do random acts of ticketing should go away. Somebody asked me not to say it that way in Wisconsin. So, but I'm not Wisconsin. But what I mean by that is don't hand your teachers a stack of tickets
and then they just pass them out randomly. Those are there to shape behavior. If you want to shape someone's behavior, you have to teach them what you expect, and then you have to acknowledge it. So there's a dude telling me what a great job I'm doing with my knots in the tree and reminding me why they're so important. So the ticket system, whatever it is, when we have an acknowledgement system, generally we try to teach kind of 3 different tiers of acknowledgements in PBIS. Immediate, like right away, intermittent,
meaning a surprise, and longer term. And the longer term acknowledgements are intended to be about helping kids feel like they belong. Then we need to make sure that we all have a way that we're responding to inappropriate behavior.
And I would say to you, in my experience, that box is the hardest box in a high school. How are we all going to get on the same page about what tardy is? Like, what a terribly boring conversation.
But the truth is, you have 15 teachers in a room, you probably have 13 different opinions of what tardy is. And that's not okay. It's especially not okay for kids who experience trauma. Kids who experience trauma need a safe, consistent, predictable environment, and that's our job. And that means we're all on the same page about how we respond. So we don't want to have a Cheeto, hot Dorito, Takis problem here with our teachers. We want to be consistent because that's what kids need. That's what all kids need. That's really what all humans need. So being a way that we find time to talk about this with our staff. Pick one thing. Whatever it is that you pick that's bothering them, find your data around it. And then talk about what you all mean by it. And talk about how you're all going to handle it.
Don't try to do all of it at once. Pick one thing. Pick one thing. And then we do need to have ways that we're using and pulling our data. And our data needs to be fresh. I think I could probably sing something there, but I won't. The data needs to be like recent, right? Like you don't want to be planning your data from like 7 weeks ago, right? That just doesn't make any sense. You want to have data that's easy enough to pull, that you can have somebody pull it before your PBIS team meeting, and they can look at it and come in and tell you what your data says. This is the job of this is tier 1. That's tier 1 PBIS. That's it. I mean, it sounds so simple. It's not, but it sounds simple, right? It's very straightforward. What is it that matters to you? What is it that matters to your kids, to your staff, your family? Pick something. Find your data around it. Go through the back door. Find acknowledgments that matter to your kids. Make sure you have a way to teach how to tie knots. Then you'll be implementing PBIS, and you will have a different culture. It will feel different because you're all on the same page. So I was in a building last week that they had a pretty solidly bad cell phone issue. That didn't make sense. They had a cell phone problem. And the teachers, this was kind of ironic, but the teachers got together and didn't do this through their PBIS team, which I can't really wrap my brain around. But the teachers are sick of the cell phones. They're just sick of them. And so the teachers start talking with each other. A couple teachers take the lead. The next thing you know, they're all communicating. The next thing you know, they're having a Zoom meeting on a Sunday with 98% participation. And they decide this needs to be our new cell phone policy.
I see it, I take it. I see it, I take it. So for 2 weeks before spring break, I see it, I take it every day, all the time. Remember, if I see that cell phone after break, I'm going to take it. Remember, if I see your cell phone, I'm going to take it. Well, guess what happened? They came back from spring break, every single one of them. I saw your cell phone, I take it. I saw your cell phone, I take it. I saw your cell phone, I take it. A year later, they don't have a cell phone problem. They don't have a cell phone problem. I was in their building for 2 days and I did not see a single cell phone. It's because they all got on the same page. They basically did PBIS without knowing they were doing it, right? What's the data? It's a cell phone data issue.
How are we going to teach it? It's a little different with cell phones, right? But how are we going to respond to it? We're going to be consistent. Everybody does the same thing. Boom, we don't have a cell phone problem. So if Whitney is the teacher, or if Whitney's the kid who always has her cell phone, I'm not supposed to be walking. If Whitney always has her cell phone out, then when Whitney comes to school the first day after break, I know Whitney, I know how she is. I'm going to say, hey, Whitney, just remember, if I see it, I have to take it. Remember, okay? Got it? All right. They were doing PBIS without calling it that. They picked what was important, they used their data, they taught what was going to happen, and then they were consistent. Teachers can do this. We just have to figure out how we're going to have the conversations. And we can't be in a hurry. If we're in a hurry, it just really won't work. Because what the painful part is, we have to get everybody's voices out on the table. Because otherwise, we're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 holdouts, and they're going to blow the whole thing. Find out what's getting on there, what's getting in the way of instruction. So there's this really great book called Belonging, The Science of Creating Connection and Bridging Divides. And the session after this one next door is going to be all about belonging in relationships. But I wanted to throw this in here because we may be people who think that after a certain age, we don't need to focus on relationships and connection. And that's just not true. Every human is wired to need connection. That's how we're wired. That's how we're surviving as a species, because we belong and we connect. So we have this idea that after we reach 12, we don't have to focus on this anymore. So there's this psychologist who says, because we give that a back seat to testing, and we give that a back seat to college admissions, that we're really missing one of the key factors of what's going to help you be a successful human. Bet that came off great on the speaker. So here's the thing. We have to continue to teach, and we have to continue to build relationships. It's offensive, I think. Let's say this again. I would find it offensive if I were in the audience and you were like, you just have to build relationships. Just build relationships. Build relationships.
It would be like, dude, do you think I don't know how to build relationships? Like, it's not that simple. We have to have conversations about what's happening when we're interacting with kids and when we're interacting with other adults. So we do need to remember that we may think there's an age where you don't have to teach anymore or focus on this, but it's just not true. There is no age like that. If you go to a new building to work, your belonging and your relationship with your supervisor is going to make or break whether you stay. So there are like 5.6 million Gallup studies. That might be a little exaggeration, but there are all of these studies that show the reason people stay in jobs almost always is tied to their relationship with their supervisor. So let's give that a minute about our own lives. Okay, so this strong sense of belonging, I'm going to read this data to you so that I don't mess it up. The two most powerful protective factors for every form of adolescent risk behavior and distress, including emotional distress, drug abuse, violence, and suicidality, were a strong sense of belonging, or how a strong sense of belonging they had in school and how strong a sense of belonging they had at home. The two biggest protective factors. We have control of one of those. Is what we're doing fueling connection and belonging, or is it fueling disconnection? There are two powerful protective factors for every form of risk behavior with adolescents. And they are the sense of belonging they have at school and the sense of belonging they have at home. So think of the kid who doesn't come to school. Think of the kid who's in trouble all the time at school. Think about whether or not we're fueling a sense of connection or a sense of belonging, or are we feeling disconnection? So the belonging effect surpassed the effects of academic performance, self-esteem, religiosity, being held back by a grade, parental absence, household access to guns. A sense of belonging at home and school. We have control over one of those. Many of those risk factors capture our attention because they're visible, but the importance of connection is invisible, right? Invisible. And yet, there are lots of ways that we can measure that with climate surveys and things that are free, and they don't have to be complicated. So the last couple of things I want to talk to you about before we go include that there's pretty great research that shows, success is really more about practice than it is intrinsic skill. I'm pretty sure if somebody worked with me every day for a long period of time, I could get the reimbursement problem done. But I do that about once every 30 or 60 days. And I can't do it, right? I'm practicing it all the time. The same is true with my knots. Like, I've not been in a tree for a year. Somebody should come help me with my knots. So this is about, what skills do our kids need, and how can we teach them, and how can we remember that practice makes a difference? The other thing that I think is so fascinating about teenagers and high schools is the best predictors of college readiness, it's not academics. It'd be so easy if it was academics. That's not true. It would still be so hard if it was academics, but it's not. Academics are not what makes successful grown-ups. Your neighbor is not going to be a successful citizen because of how they did in math. Some of that math isn't important, but it's about how they interact with humans, right? So the same is true of life success. Social and emotional readiness and resilience are the best predictors of college success, of college readiness. Self-discipline, right? The ability to know what's important and prioritize and study. The emotional readiness. I have a niece and nephew who just started college this semester. I think they're like the world's smartest children. They're beautiful, they're sweet, they're lovey, they're smart. And going to college was a struggle. There were things that we didn't know they didn't have. And it wasn't math. It wasn't math. Sorry, I keep picking on math. And then also financial readiness was one of them. So maturity is hard to measure, but it is one of the predictors that our kids are gonna adjust to college life, and we could just move that on and erase the word college. It's gonna show us if they are gonna be successful at life. So I put this like ridiculously old study in here because the Carnegie Council on Adolescence, this is like super old, but I think still relevant. So here are the things that they think we need to focus on with youth, including academic. These are all the different areas that if they think, when they think successful adolescence and development, these are all the areas we cover. So how do we start to get your teachers to just identify this themselves? How do we start to get them to identify what they want in a neighbor? What they want? I mean, at the Chick-fil-A window, I've got some issues with Chick-fil-A, but let me tell you, when they say it was an honor to wait on you, I'm a little like, You know, like what's important to them? And let's make sure that we have conversations about bigger things, not denying academics are a priority. It just can't be the only priority. So there are lots of secondary outcomes that help if you get those other pieces in place that help kids feel competent, connected, and caring. And we know that adolescents need that ongoing support. So I know I only have about 2 minutes left. So I just want to say to you that it works when you do it. There were slides in Lucille's show yesterday morning in the keynote. I have slides in here. But when it is done well in high schools, do we have less research in high schools? We do. Do we have fewer numbers in high schools? We do. However, two things. Like, what else are you going to do? Like, not data, not systems, not practices. Like, what? I don't know what else there is to do. If you're going to have a framework, data systems and practices are going to drive it. And if you're going to have a framework and it's done with fidelity, you will see things get better. Not just with kids, but also with grown-ups. So the last thing I want to say, this is really not the last thing I want to say because I have like 12 slides left. But anyway, this is particularly important in high school because all those things that I've talked about this morning will help reduce dropout rate. We know what happens to kids who drop out. The life trajectory is not good. So we have control of one of those two factors, whether kids belong, and we also have control over whether or not we use data systems and practices to get organized. That's what PBIS is, not a bounty house, not a sticker. There's also information out now that says this is Amy language, obviously, if you kind of sort of do PBIS, you're going to get the results as if you don't do it at all. So think about that. We're kind of sort of putting in a lot of effort, zero outcome. Do it or don't do it. But the kind of halfway doing it is not going to help you or your staff or your kids. So I have exactly 50 seconds left. Thank you very much for your attention. I did not have anyone up in front opening a Subway sandwich and the newspaper, which I appreciate. I also appreciate no one seemed to be shopping on Amazon. It's not Amazon Prime Day, which was a big help. So I really do appreciate all of your attention. And, I hope that you have time to talk to each other because there's so much experience in this room. And your data guy from yesterday is right up here in the hat. So math data guy. All right. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day and safe travels home.